I've never formally studied music, but just playing this Red Cedar Flute and the traditional songs and the traditional instrument, people have experiences, they have reactions to it, they're drawn to it. Some people have even spiritual reactions to the song. And this is the journey I have had with this flute and its music.
Cool. It's so great to watch that piece. It's just the space, the music, everything was just such a beautiful experience to watch, and it was really exciting because Dalton kind of kept telling us that some cool stuff had happened unexpectedly, and was kind of teasing that the barn swallows at the end and being able to go to this beautiful church space, and it was just such a thrill to then get to watch the final piece later on, just to kind of see how everything came together. Speaking of that, Bryan, what was the piece you played in this film? Was that one of your original compositions?
No, that's came from the Dakota Odawa. It's a hymn, and it's called Lackey Parley, or The Lake That Speaks.
Hmm.
And it's a Dakota Native Air composition in the hymnal, meaning it's an old traditional melody that was transcribed back in 1835, and it was put to music, and then they used Dakota words to translate the Bible, and they put it into the hymnal.
Very nice. Um, in that church space, tell us a little bit about that. That was your grandmother used to play the piano there. Is that correct? Or what's
Yeah,
your kind of connection to that space?
yeah, my grandmother played that piano for 50 years
Wow.
in that church there. And I stayed with her every summer. My dad would drop me off as soon as school got out, and I would stay there all summer. And then when school started, he would bring me back. So I spent a lot of time there, and she took us to the church every Sunday. And so that's probably one of the main churches I've been to regularly is Mayasa.
And am I correct that there's some kind of work to try to make that a historical building site, or to somehow kind of work to preserve that space?
Well, yeah, and I've been working on the preliminary, the National Register of Historic Sites, and I'll submit that to the South Dakota Historical Society. And that's been so interesting because I'm even finding out more than what I knew. And a lot of what I knew about the place in the grant or what I'm writing was oral history and things that I know. But now I'm finding books and cross-referencing and finding it, you know, in books also. And it kind of helped me order it and see the timeline. And then all kinds of other interesting things started to happen.
You know, how, you know, maybe it's a bigger question, but how do you feel like your music connects to the spaces that you're playing it in? You know, I think of it in particular with this church because you have such a long history there and there's so many connections. But, you know, does your music, do you feel like you interact with the land or the space that you're playing in as you perform? Does it kind of adjust the way you play a piece depending upon where you are?
Well, I could give you a little story that kind of maybe answers the question. And I think I was at the Northern Plains Tribal Arts and I met George Horsecapture, and he was the curator for the Buffalo Bill Historical Center. And he invited me out there to play the flute. And there was a big national, he was hosting a national curators association. So big museums from all the United States, they were sending their curators, and they were all from the big cities. And he wanted to have this dinner way out in the middle of nowhere. It was in a box canyon near the mountains. And it was the Buffalo Bill's, one of his original cabins. And so it was a really unique place and just a perfect setting. And off to the distance, the mountains, towards sunset, I was watching, and it was a long ways away, but I could see elk, a herd of elk coming down the mountains one by one and coming down this big slope. And there must have been 50 or more elk coming in there. And so I started playing, and it was kind of like a big canopy tent, and it was outdoors, and it was for all these people. They were serving dinner. And I just started playing, and it was kind of hot, so they had one side of the canopy totally open, and there was a large meadow there. And as I was playing, everyone started moving around and doing something and looking. And so I turned and looked, and I just kept playing. And there were 5 white-tailed deer, and they were coming closer. It looks like they were curious, where they would kind of slowly take a few steps forward towards us and then stop, then look around and advance a little more. And they didn't get real close, but they got fairly close. And then, I don't know, one of them seemed he did something. It's just like he pranced or something. He stomped his foot and he kind of bobbed up and down. And then pretty soon he kind of went sideways to sideways. And then he spun around and he started doing that. And then pretty soon another deer started doing that. And then all of them. And it looked like they were dancing. And I'm playing the flute this whole time. And I just started trying to play as hard as I could and get that sound out there and get in. It was just, I couldn't believe what I was watching. And when I finished the song, they just all stopped. and they turned and all ran off. And all these big city people, that they couldn't believe what, they never been out in the country, and they probably never seen a cow or anything, and this is the first time they were out there, and they seen and experienced something like that. But it was special for me too. And then sometime later, I talked to Albert Whitehat, and he's gone now, he passed. But I told him about that, and I asked him, do you think this is some like supernatural or something? And he said, no. He said, it's just not supernatural or nothing. He said, a long time ago, the Dakota people, they had a connection with nature, and that's where they lived. And so everything they did was somehow connected in a way to nature. He said, the song you played might have been just the right notes. It might have been just the right melody. And those deer recognized that, and that connection was still there. And so that's how he explained it. And so over the years, and that was probably the biggest one I had, but a lot of times people tell me that birds come and sing along with their flute playing and outside. And I've had that happen, so I know that they come, and it's almost like they answer you, and they'll stay in the trees around you and listen to the song. So even the natural, the nature has a reaction to the flute, traditional flute melodies, and the scale that they play and the sounds that they make.
Yeah, even in this piece, when the barn swallows all came in through that kind of cracked window at the end and were flying around, Dalton, I remember you kind of describing that experience, but you're moved just as a listener, but then as a filmmaker, there has to be that back part of your brain that's going, please tell me I'm still filming, please tell me I'm still filming. What was that experience like? I mean, both with the ending of the piece, but just being in that space in general, doing that filming.
Well, it as you know now, that it wasn't originally what we went out there to do, and thanks to Jane, she just mentioned Maya-san, and she's like, I was looking for a place to film Bryan just playing, and I thought it would be just a part of it, a short little snippet or something like that. And she had mentioned, well, you should talk to him about Maya-san, this church that he used to go to. And so I asked him about it. We went out there, and it literally, he's pulling the boards off of the church, and we go in there, and it's just, it was, I don't know how to describe it. It's the ultimate thing that you look for, I think, when you're trying to find things like that. I could never have imagined it. I couldn't have conjured that up. I couldn't have said, here's what I want, so now let's go get that. Instead, like you said, I was watching this, and I don't know that I was very conscious at the time about how amazing it was, because you're just sort of there and you're in it. Much like Bryan playing the song, I was filming, and had Eddie standing right next to me running audio, and us trying not to trip over a stray log or something that would have been behind me, because I was walking backwards. And so yeah, just hoping that I got it and did it any amount of justice whatsoever. But it's not half as powerful as being in the room when it happened. And actually the intro of him walking up, we filmed that after the fact. And that was kind of a thing where I knew that I needed something like that. And I knew as soon as we were done, as soon as he finished that song, I was like, this is it. In that moment, it all hits you, and it comes rushing in going, this is it. And when Eddie and I left, we were almost giddy. We were kind of giggling, like, did that just happen? Like, that was so powerful. That was so amazing. It was beautiful. And it, I wished I can nitpick it technically from my perspective of, I wish I could have, I wish I would have had this or could have done that, or maybe a different lens or whatever. But it is what it is, and I like that. I wouldn't change it now. I think if even if I couldn't improve. I don't think you could improve upon it. No way, especially and certainly not anything that Bryan did. That was amazing.
Well, I really like how, intentionally or unintentionally, both of you kind of work similarly, at least on this piece, as far as the music being very rooted in the land and the surrounding and kind of a cultural context, and then Dalton, you really trying to chase the story that's there and not bring a perspective or try to say something that you think needs to be said, but kind of being embedded in that space and that experience, and just find a way to do some justice of capturing that experience to share more widely, rather than coming in saying, well, I've got my script and I'm supposed to talk to these 3 people and get these 3 talking points and then move on with my day. Which, you did. I mean, you had an idea coming into town. We were going to talk about a lot of the stuff that the Sisseton Arts Council was doing. There was a lot of things going on, so maybe that's a good opportunity to ask, just with your time in Sisseton and seeing all of these kind of collaborative programs that are happening, what kind of struck you about the community or about the kind of limited time you spent up in Sisseton working on this piece?
Well, the first thing I think that struck me was we had an interview with Jane, and so before we went up and filmed at the church, I had shot an interview which was a wonderful interview. And I thought, yeah, we've got it. Now I just have to go get B-roll to, fill this in and show what she's talking about. And then we went to Mayasan, and the rest is history. But I did come back, and I spent some time in town and just going, I'm not knocking on doors and going, hey, what's going on in there? But just driving around and getting a sense of the place, because I'm incredibly visual. And when somebody says something and references a building or a place or something like that, Jane had mentioned that every time she sees an empty building, she just thinks, what could we do with that? What could go there? And it's always, of course, an art focused thought process. And that's all I was thinking about. I just kept driving through there, and I was like, hey, and not that not that the town is just full of empty buildings, but there was a couple of vacant buildings, and I thought, I wonder what Jane's going to do, because I know she's going to do something. And there were, of course, there's murals everywhere, and there's all these, and also, just as a side note, I took so many pictures for future reference, because that it's a unique layout of a town, and I just kept thinking, I got to film a movie here, and you could easily go back to 1958, and you could change hardly anything, and it would just be spot on. And I love that because I think there's so many old buildings and towns that were just sort of ruined by the 1980s, dare I say. But we're guilty of that here in Sioux Falls. But anyway, that aside, just once again getting that sense of, it feels like it's way out here. It's not that far off the interstate, but it's not real close to anything besides the interstate. And but there's just so much going on out there. And I visited the college, the school out there, which that's where we actually did the interview. And I've been there a couple of times. That's where I did with, is it Derek Lawrence?
Yeah. Yep.
Derek, yeah. Jamie had done one of those Dakota. Yeah, you were there. Yeah, the two of us went out there and filmed that Dakota Duets thing with her. So I've been there before. Mm-hmm. And I love that. I love that place too. There's just I don't know. There's a presence going on there, and
yeah, we found that hall. It seemed like just a blank hallway, but it had the best sounding reverb. And so we set them up in there, and we had all the natural light coming in, and then had that kind of natural reverb of the space of the hall. Again, that's another example, I think, of collaborating with the space you're playing in instead of fighting it.
Right. For sure. Yeah, you just got to kind of go with what I think if you go in I was going with a plan. That's a safety net. I think if nothing else, I think I try to go in with something I know that I can get, or at least I'm going to try. but I'm really, I'm very instinctual, and I'm very kind of, I don't want to say laid back with that, but I definitely go with the flow. And I think letting that sense of discovery sort of guide me. And because I'm not from there. I don't live there. So when somebody like Jane says, "Hey, you got to check this out," I got to go there, and I'm going to do that. When Bryan says, "Hey, there's this church," I'm going to go there, and I'm just, because they're the experts, not me. I just try to stay out of the way as best I can, and try to capture it as honestly as I can. And at the beginning of the piece, there's some music that's in there, and Bryan's flute sort of guides that. I scored the music for the opening. There's just some sort of atmospheric kind of mood, presence type stuff that I added to it, but his notes are in there, and I put that down first, and I let that guide then where even the music went. So
Yeah, it's such it was just such a beautiful piece, and such a surprise in a good way. That kind of leads me, speaking of Sisseton, Jane, the arts are really embedded in a lot of our communities in South Dakota, but Sisseton really seems to be a good example of that. It seems like the arts are woven throughout a lot of what happens in the community. And I know that you've been up to an awful lot recently with the new roundabout sculptures and the walkability with the AARP grant that you recently got. But just in general, it seems like, having played in the theater in Sisseton, having done a number of things up there, it seems like it's just a very creative community at its core. Is that something you've seen for a long time? Is that something that has been actively cultivated, a little bit of all of the above?
I think the beautiful thing is that it's just really always been there. I think in everything you're talking about right now, how much the landscape really does speak to the people that live here. And I think that the arts are just a really wonderful voice for that. And also the energy that we have because of the cultural diversity in the community. There's just always something more that you can learn from people. It's such a deep well of possibilities. So I think that that as we can just tap into that and build relationships and have the opportunity, the privilege to just get to do things alongside people like Bryan. What more could you ask for? And just to be present when things like that happen, like Dalton's experience. So I'm just so glad that day, because I knew there was kind of a plan, and we were going with the plan. And it just happened that I'd seen Bryan earlier that day out at the college, and he'd talked about my son. And so as we started to line up this, follow along with the other plan, it just, I'm so glad that it took that direction. And I think that's the thing then, that sometimes you just have to listen to what's going on and like do the authentic thing. Sisseton maybe isn't, sometimes we'd look at other communities and think, oh, I wish we could do this, or I wish we could do that. But the more I think that we learn to see what's really present in our own community, then our art becomes the authentic thing that belongs here.
Yeah, that feels like such an organic process.
I love that word, authenticity. Sorry, I don't want to jump in there, but it's just such having been there and having seen that and done what I, captured what I got. It's always the thing that I want to be true to, is the authenticity of a real sense of place. And that the idea that you could say, oh, well, we could pluck this church and then stick it in anywhere in rural America, and it would still feel the same. I don't believe that. I don't believe that to be true at all. Even though some might say it's just a building, this is from the land, and the music itself even too. And so, yeah, that word of authenticity is a great word. So I just wanted to jump in and say I concur completely.
Well, and I really like that idea of tapping into what you have. You know, I think that a lot of communities of all sizes look at what they don't have and think, or they look at some other community and think, oh, well, we just need that thing. And then they try to bring that thing in. Without it being a homegrown, you know, organic rooted process. And it seems like in Sisseton, you know, the work of the Arts Council and the work of a lot of the local artists, you're both encouraging what's there. You are bringing outside voices in, but typically it's in a collaborative or a dialogue way instead of, you know, some communities I think fall into the trap of we need to bring an expert from outside in to tell us what we're missing. Whereas, you know, I think of the collaborations between like the South Dakota Symphony and Bryan, like the piece that you did with Jeff, Bryan, is beautiful, and it's great. I get the honor of playing in a group with Jeff Paul, and so he was kind of running the piece by us and showing us snippets and things as it was in process. And but you know, it seems like it's always a dialogue instead of just let's bring someone else in, or let's just take what we have and export it somewhere else. You know, it seems like there's a back and forth. Is that kind of a conscious effort, Jane, or is that just something that you think has kind of come up naturally?
I think it's kind of evolved. I think, you know, from my own experience, I think that has developed. And in this conversation, one part of that really comes to mind is a few years ago, we had the opportunity to do this project with Arts Midwest called Arts Midwest World Fest that brings the global performers into communities in a residency program over a couple of years. So it's really deep and rich, and we were so excited to have these people coming into our community from Israel and Brazil and China and Quebec. And I think the thing that really startled us or stuck with us was that we were preparing to be, you know, so overwhelmed by what they were bringing us. And throughout the course of the week, they kept, each group would reflect, comment, talk about what they were seeing in this community. And we weren't expecting that. And I think, so it's that seeing your own community sometimes through other people's eyes that are looking at you through maybe an artistic or cultural. I think that was, you know, seeing the rich culture, particularly of the Dakota people, made us look at ourselves in a different way. So I think the bringing the outside collaborations have really been significant for us in understanding ourselves in new ways.
So Bryan, for you, you know, what brings you back to the Sisseton area? You know, you just recently were down in New Mexico doing some additional studies. We were talking before the conversation started. You obviously studied with Oscar Howe at USD when you were a younger man. You've kind of traveled all over. You've done a lot and been a lot of places. So what kind of keeps you wanting to come back to Sisseton and be in relationship with the area?
Well, I was born here, and both of my parents are from here, and all of my grandparents going back are all from here. And so I spent a lot of time here, and my mother worked for many years for the child protection program for the tribe. And so even when I was married and we had children, well, in my teaching job, elementary education, I was an elementary teacher at the Chiospazina Tribal School. So we lived here and raised our kids here. And so I have a lot of relatives here and friends and people we've known a long time.
Great. Maybe the last question, and I'll start with you, Bryan, and then maybe Jane, if you would want to say anything as well. What do you think would be lost if there wasn't such a vibrant, creative arts community in Sisseton? What's at stake if people aren't supporting our creators and culture bearers in the region?
Well, I kind of know what it was like a long time ago. And in general, there's not much in South Dakota for the arts. And then even you come back here and there's just wasn't nothing for the arts. And one of the first people I met in the 80s was Harold Moore. And he worked at the Tickawith, and then it wasn't the orphanage or mission center. It was, he made an art gallery there. And one of the main focus was Paul Warcloud's paintings. And so he developed, he came up with putting on an art festival, and he worked really hard at it. And it was really successful. A lot of people came. There were so many cars and all the way out to the highway, and people were coming to that. Before that, there's really nothing. And then soon after that was the Northern Plains Tribal Arts in Sioux Falls. And it reminded me, took me so much, it made me think of Santa Fe Institute of American Indian Arts. And that place, if you've been there, is like the mecca for Native American art. There's art everywhere. There's major events every day, all year round in art. And so you go from that, then you come back here, and you could really tell the difference there. But recently, I think the Sisseton Arts Council really added a lot to that. And without them, because I don't know if there'd be anything going on here for the art. And they got the Sisseton High School, the Center for the Arts, and then they got the Nicollet Tower. And they're always doing something and keeping artists active with murals, and just recently the sculpture on the roundabout. So I think all these things help. And otherwise, I would always have to be traveling someplace to art shows or going someplace else. And also with my music, the tribe out here, I played a lot over in the Rotundra in the new administrative building, and that's really awesome place to play. And then we got the Lakota Music Projects and the Composition Academy, and that really, all these things really helped to keep the art alive here.
Yeah, great. Jane, how about from your perspective, what would be lost if there wasn't this vibrant arts community in your community?
Well, for one thing, I guess, like I said before, maybe I would have met Bryan along the way, and when I'd see him at the post office or somewhere, I'd be able to say, "Hey, hi, how are you doing?" And he'd say, "Hey, how are you doing?" And that would be it. But I think because of being able to work on projects, you really have this opportunity to develop significant relationships with people that become something really meaningful. I don't know why it is about the arts, but you're digging deeper, and you really care about the things that people are doing, and you see how people like Bryan can be such an example to a younger generation. He has participated in the Composing Academy before, and then he's, you've got these teenage kids that are seeing him work with his music, and they see themselves like, well, maybe I could do that. So I think relationships would definitely be something that would be missing, that is really important to me. I think that seeing potential for the next generation, something would be lost there. I think I was thinking back to, I think when I first got to know Bryan, it was early in the years of the Arts Council, and one of the first things that we started doing, we still do, is children's theater residencies. So we started with Missoula Children's Theater. Now we've also added the Dakota Players, but Bryan's kids were involved and our kids were involved, and that's probably how, so it's kind of interesting to think that that's, where the friendship first began, was just meeting each other, with having our kids involved in the arts, and then led to other things. So I just can't quite, that's a tough question, because I really can't imagine the community without some vibrant arts going on anymore.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably the most powerful way to say it, of just, it seems like it's so embedded in the Sisseton area right now that if you didn't have it, it would just be transformed and be completely something different. It seems like it's not that the arts are grafted on top of what else is going on, but that it's really woven throughout the fabric of everything happening in the community. And so that's, kind of exciting to hear that it would be vastly different.
And it's the partnerships too. It's like, we're working with the city now to do this sculpture work. And when we're working with the academy and we reach out to the tribe, and they're always, really helpful and providing spaces and housing, and all these partnerships develop because you have a shared interest in providing something that will either make your community more beautiful, or will do something. Most of the time it's because it's going to do something for our students, or to just to improve the quality of life for everybody. So then it's fun seeing people work together around a common purpose.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if there's anything better to say than that. So this might be a good spot to kind of end the conversation. But I just wanted to say, thank you again so much to Bryan Akipa, to Jane Rasmussen, and to Dalton Coffey for joining us today for this conversation. It was really exciting to get a chance to talk in a little more depth about some of what came up in the video and everything going on in Sisseton, and just get an opportunity to virtually see you all. I'm tired of seeing my face in a little box, but on the other hand, it's been kind of a good opportunity to get to do a lot more of these conversations, and get a chance to be in conversation and learn from a lot of people around the state that sometimes it's hard to do when we're kind of just nose to the grindstone in our day-to-day work. So thank you all so much. Really appreciate your time today, and looking forward to releasing these videos.
Yeah, thank you guys. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much.